When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
Welcome to the HTML All the Things Podcast. Today we have a very special episode, very special guest, Anthony Shew, and we're going to be talking about how Turborepo changed the way I use monorepos. And if that sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can check us out on Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And before we go on, we do have a affiliate link for Scrimba.com that gives you a 20% discount. That is scrimba.com/links/HTML All the Things. Scrimba is a developer education platform that allows you to take courses and learn and actually write code as someone is teaching you. You can write directly in the browser. You can replace the code that the educator put in there. You can put your own code in there. They have a new full stack curriculum out, which is super, super cool because that's where everything is these days. So definitely give that a shot. Give that a go. And it's scrimba.com/links/HTML All the Things to get that 20% discount. But now we're going to be jumping into the episode with Anthony Shew, who is the head of developer experience for Turbo at Vercel. And honestly, Turborepo is the thing that kind of changed the way I view monorepos as a whole. I used to be pretty much against them, and then all of a sudden I tried Turborepo. It worked flawlessly with my pretty large monorepo with like 7 different apps, a bunch of different packages. So we dive into why that is, how Vercel kind of does that, and we also dive into what a monorepo is. Because again, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't even understand what the difference is, that's one of the first questions we answer. So Anthony does a great job at going through and guiding us step by step, talking about what's next for Turborepo, what Turborepo has that other monorepo management services don't have, and talking about a little bit of AI and how AI is kind of being brought into the monorepo landscape and why maybe it's actually ahead of the curve in terms of AI and allowing you to have more context. Tons more that we talk about. Really excited for everyone to hear it. So let's jump into that interview. All right, we have Anthony Shew on the line. Super excited to talk to you, Anthony, because I've been a user of Turborepo for the past several years, probably really close to when it came out, actually. I've been a Vercel customer for a really long time, and I've used monorepos in different capacities before, and have now switched. I think all of my projects are on Turbo, which is cool. So this is another one of those in a series of Selfish Mike episodes where I bring on someone that I've always wanted to talk to about a technology that I am enthusiastic about. So really excited to kind of dive deep into monorepos, Turborepo, and everything. But before that, I kind of want to give it to you, ask you how you're doing, give you a chance to introduce yourself. So how's it going, Anthony?
How's it going? Yeah, no, super excited to be here. I'm Anthony. As mentioned, I do work on Turborepo. I think also I do think a lot about like our CI experience and our CD experience on Vercel. So between those two things, we're trying to just put together a CI/CD experience that people love. I think Vercel kind of folks really know that like production, like this is the deployed app, it's on Vercel and stuff like that. But I like to think a lot about, there's a road to getting there, and we want to make sure that we have that nice smooth road. It's a great experience. There's a place in between your local dev experience and the actual production assets that go out. So yeah, we think a lot about that. And yeah, trying to think of if I have a fun party trick. Oh, I used to play pro baseball. I don't know. That's my fun fact, I guess. But yeah, that's me. That's pretty much all the interesting things about me.
I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing. Pro baseball is no joke. So that transition must have been pretty fun going from pro baseball to developer. I feel like there's not that many. Have you met many like athlete to developer?
I worked with one in the past.
Cool.
I can say that we do have a few former athletes. I don't know if professional athletes, but definitely some college athletes at Vercel that I can think of.
Yeah, haven't heard of it. So you're the first one I've met for sure, Anthony. So that's awesome. All right, but let's dive right into monorepos. I kind of want to give you a chance to define what a monorepo is to you versus a traditional repo approach.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I think there kind of ends up being a few definitions that folks go with for monorepos when I talk about monorepos. I really only care about that all of your code that you're concerned with is in one repository. I think some folks get hung up on, for instance, like having different sets of code that don't actually work with each other, right? You might have like two top level directories, and some folks will call that like a multi-repo, and or I've heard different words, but for me, a monorepo is all your code's in one box. The opposite of a monorepo, if you will, is having multiple repos. And so that's what I call a multi-repo usually. And yeah, so you'll have, one package over here in this repository, one package over here in this repository, an application over here, another application over here, and you'll bind those together on your infrastructure and they'll meet up, somewhere in CI/CD or however that works out for your organization or for you. But yeah, in a monorepo, you get to write a bunch of related code together and you can ship those applications that are in that repository separately, which is something that sometimes folks don't realize is just because there's one repository, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to ship and deploy everything together. You can actually sort of unbind all of the different applications that are in there and have your own sort of orchestration that comes after the fact of just committing. You do commit once to the repository, but after that, there's a number of things that can happen.
Yeah, I like that. So like it, and I do see that confusion sometimes from people where like they think that a monorepo is just a main project and a bunch of packages, where that's not, I mean, from my perspective, that's not really the case a lot of the time. Like our entire infrastructure, including one, two, three, four, five different production applications, are located inside of a single monorepo, with obviously all of our tooling and all of our
Right.
libraries and services and stuff like that, also inside that monorepo in different folders. So it could be many different things, is what I'm trying to get at, and what
Right.
I think you were trying to say as well. I'm curious if you could name it. What's the biggest advantage versus a traditional setup of having everything in one repo? Like obviously you said working with each other. Is that the biggest one, or is there other advantages that you could think of that are even bigger?
I would say for me, the first thing that I think of is when I joined Vercel, we actually have two major monorepos. We have lots of other, kind of sidecar repos, but we have two major monorepos that we use. And I did one Git pull and I had very nearly everything that I needed for almost everything that I work on. The other repository, I just wasn't going to work with that one just because of the nature of my job at that time. But yeah, I had like all of our front ends all at once. And for me, that was really powerful. We have all of these packages that we use. For instance, there's the, UI package. And if I wanted to fix a bug that I found in our UI package, I could just edit that code. It's a part of my commit. I get to, because of course, Vercel is using Vercel, we dogfood our product. And so I would see my bug fix go out on all of these preview deployments all at once. And I could see that I could just check my code. I could go click around, or automated testing would run against all of that change that I made. So I get to make that one commit, and I have everything that's going to happen already. The juxtaposition of that, the other way that that would work in that multi-repo scenario that I mentioned, I would make those changes. I would publish the package up to npm or something like that. And then I would have to go over to where all the applications live, and if you have 10 applications, you'd have to go update 10 repositories then, and you would have to go inspect all those individually. For me, I just like this faster, at least in my experience. I've had the experience of working with both, and so yeah, I just feel like monorepos, when you have the organizational buy-in and when kind of the culture is there to understand, like, hey, we are all in this together. We don't need that team to have their repository and this team to have their repository. No, we actually do want to go together. You get to go faster. You get to kind of be in each other's worlds a little bit. Sometimes that's scary. I can go, edit some package that belongs to some other team. And I would ask them, of course, hey, can you guys look this over? You guys know this better than me. But yeah, culturally, I feel like is actually the thing that I love most about a monorepo. We all feel like we're in it together.
I never thought of it that way, like bringing everyone together under one roof. I do see a lot of benefit in our own team where we have a lot of cross like platform knowledge now because of the monorepo, whereas
Right.
before we were more siloed.
Right.
So it that definitely came out, but like the culture aspect of it, I think that you're 100% correct because everyone knows what we're talking about. Even when you have like conflicts, you kind of jump on and solve them together, which is kind of cool
Right.
sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes with disaster. But regardless, it can be pretty fun and just a better team environment. So
Yeah.
I have noticed that as well in my own experience. Just to get a little bit technical right off the bat here, you mentioned sidecar. Can you describe that? Like, and from my perspective, is that like a more of a hybrid approach a little bit where you have other repos outside the monorepo, but can still interact with the monorepo? Just curious.
Sure, yeah. Specifically for our case, we have one repository that's all of our front ends. We have one repository that's responsible for like the infrastructure that Vercel customers use. And specifically for our case, this is probably not everybody's case. We have those split so that the infrastructure, if we have an incident in the infrastructure, or vice versa, if we have some problem with our front end, they're not bound together in a way that like we can't undo them. And so like the repositories are mainly split. We actually talk all the time about putting them together just because we see so many benefits from it. But at the end of the day, we have to take care of our customers first. And so that's why we keep them split. And then, yeah, we have a bunch of other smaller repositories. Usually these come in the form of, for instance, Turborepo, we couldn't put in our closed source repository, right? We want that to be an open source project. We're proud of that. And Next.js, for same exact story. We have a bunch of packages that we publish that are just open source packages that folks can use. And so, yeah, those are all out in open source. We also have, for instance, like examples that folks can go use and access. So those are out in open source too, so that folks can have them. And yeah, sometimes we'll like do some experiment that you don't want to be in the main repo for whatever reason. You just have some science experiment that you're doing, and you just want to go off into your own little world, and then maybe you'll bring it home to the big repo. So yeah, there's a number of reasons. I feel like a lot of the time when we talk about monorepos, folks get it in their head that it's like, oh, like it's this like religion that like now everything has to be shoved into this repository that everybody's working in. And it's like, no, okay, like we can be practical about this. There are benefits to using a monorepo. There are also trade-offs, and one of those is, science experiments, like I was mentioning, get a little bit more costly just because you are working with a bunch of other code. It's totally reasonable to want to just take that over and just do your own little thing just for, take that week to make that POC and then bring it home to the big repository.
Yeah, I could see the benefit of that. I think that's where I also kind of draw the line a lot of the time is the open source aspect. Like if we want to make something open source, I haven't been
Right.
able to, I don't think there is a pattern. Maybe there is, but you could tell me if I'm wrong, of having an open source package inside of your monorepo. From my understanding, it's just better to separate them out regardless because you're not going to be sharing any of the code that you've written internally anyway. So it makes sense. So that's good that I'm glad to get the clarification because I was hoping that I'm not crazy. So it sounds like I'm not crazy. Thank you for that.
Listeners, you can keep listening to Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Not a bad dev yet. Okay, so with Turborepo specifically, I'm kind of curious your
Sure.
thoughts here because Turborepo is just another way to do monorepos, and I think it combines like multiple different monorepo technologies, and you have your own obviously as well. I'm curious, what are the key features that kind of separate out Turborepo? Why use Turborepo in the first place, right?
Right. Yeah. This is a great question. One of the first things that people ask about monorepos when they're learning about these conceptually is, you have this one giant chunk of code. And so, for instance, if you want to run like some build command, you have to organize all of those build command. You want to build the package first, then you want to build the package that depends on that first package. And then there's this ordering that has to happen. And then all of a sudden you get up to your final application. And so you have to make sure everything gets built first. And since every package, if you're doing everything right, assumingly, if you have to build all of those packages in order. Turborepo does that. So we are able to inspect your repository. We see all the relationships between all the packages, and we'll make sure that the right things happen in the right order according to the description of the repository that you've gave us. We try to keep everything as low configuration as possible. We work really hard to make sure that we look at we call it the package graph. We look at your package graph and we can create a set of tasks that we understand, okay, this one comes first, this one comes second, this one comes third. And that's really powerful by itself. The part that we stack on top of that is a caching layer. And so you can imagine that, for instance, I mentioned the usual case that I use as an example is you have some UI package, and then you have maybe three applications that use that UI package. Well, every time you run turbo run build, we could do everything from scratch, but that would mean rebuilding that UI package every time that one of those applications changes. And realistically, when you write commits, you're not necessarily going to affect every single package every single time. So there's really no reason to be doing all that same exact work over and over again. If you have the same set of code in a package, we know what's when you run build what the end result is. So instead of doing that, we just make it so you never do the same work twice. We cache it. So when you run turbo run build, you can hit cache for things that don't have changes. So between those two things, getting the right order and getting the right caching behavior, you can end up a lot faster in a monorepo, even faster than I guess I would argue if you had a whole bunch of repositories. As I was mentioning, you have to orchestrate all that by hand yourself and make sure that everything happens. We just kind of read the repository, cache things that we can, run the things in the right order, and try to create a better experience that way.
Do you need Vercel to take advantage of that, or is this something that can work outside of Vercel, like for like dev caching or something like that?
Sure, no. Turborepo, we are very proudly open source. You can set up your own remote caching server. So we have an open API spec. I actually just actually a couple weeks ago, set up like a human readable spec. We've always published like a JSON open API specification, but I just made one that's like easier for us humans to read. So we put that in the blog post for our release last week. And no, Turborepo is an open source project, so you can connect to whatever backend caches you want. You can run anywhere that you want. Of course, we do make sure that Vercel works great with Turborepo. We have everything automatically configured for Vercel Remote Cache so that when you run a build on Vercel, you are automatically connected to that cache. So we're already going to do all the work of making sure that all of those connections are there. You can connect your local environment to Vercel Remote Cache as well. We recently made at the beginning of this year, Vercel Remote Cache is free to use for anyone. So we want to make sure that we have that like zero configuration caching experience for anyone that you can take to whatever CI you're using, whether that be Vercel or elsewhere.
Yeah, and I can kind of give a little bit more insight here too, because we use Vercel and Turborepo. The difference in build times when we enable or disable cache, because I've done that experiment a few times now for different reasons, but the difference is anywhere between like a regular build takes about 5.5 minutes for all of our applications, and a turbo build with nothing changed in any of the packages takes 1 minute. So it's
Awesome.
about yeah,
Cool to hear.
yeah, it's about a 5x difference. So it makes a really big difference when doing rapid production deployments or rapid staging deployments too, which we do a lot of. So that's why we kind of chose the Turborepo approach and we went deep into it. So yeah, I think it's a super cool tool for people that are already using monorepos, but I think the biggest advantage for us is that zero configuration because we were new to monorepos for the most part as a team and being able to just get started without really doing anything. I think our first day we were like up and running with the turbo repo in a matter of hours with a pretty big amount of packages. Yeah, like that was the thing that sold us because we tried other ones, had some
That's
issues
that's
before.
That's cool to hear. That's something that we really work hard at is folks being able to incrementally migrate,
Yeah.
whether you're, as you're mentioning in your case, where you have existing code and you want to, get into a turbo repo. We try to make sure that that's a good experience on day zero all the way to, as long as that repository is there. So
Yeah.
good to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And then everything else kind of opens up as you go to it. The incremental thing is really important because like you first get in there, but then you need, as your repo gets more mature, you need to get the more advanced configuration stuff out and everything that works in, for instance, pnpm workspaces and stuff like that will work with Turbo. So that helped us a ton. And then
Right.
you have your own configuration. So like there's a lot, there's a lot to monorepos. And having said that, I'm kind of curious, do you have any like general tips and tricks for people when they're getting into monorepos? Let's say someone is managing 5, 6 different packages, front ends, and stuff like that.
Sure.
What's the selling point? What do you tell them, like what they should do? What are the first steps, whatever?
Sure, yeah. I would say something that I think folks get tripped up on is, for instance, for the going from many repos to one repository. sometimes folks trick themselves into treating kind of that package structuring as something that has to be like re-architected to be used in the monorepo. The thing that's funny is what it takes to publish a package to npm, you actually just have to like do almost the exact same thing. You just build the package, but then the artifacts that are in that distributable directory are what you use in the monorepo. And so really the only thing is you just don't publish. And sometimes folks kind of do a lot of gymnastics to like do a bunch of like weird TypeScript paths and stuff like that, or they think they have to like use the raw TypeScript, for instance, or there's a lot of different things that folks come up with. And what I always try to tell people is like, hey, like you get to do the exact same thing. It's just all in one space and it's all just right there and available to you. There are definitely, of course, like some re-architecting things that you have to do to get a package into a monorepo, just because you're kind of, going from the outside world and into the monorepo. And sometimes, you have some dependency upgrades that you have to do. Have to make something agree as far as across the package boundaries. Maybe there's some, as I mentioned, like a dependency that needs upgrading or downgrading or what have you, just to make it a happy part of the rest of the repository. I have a lot of thoughts about that specifically as far as like dependency across monorepos go, but I'll save my spiel unless you're interested.
Sure. I mean, off the call, I'll probably be interested because all that technical stuff is super interesting to me, considering I'm deep in it. But yeah,
Yeah.
we can save the audience from the super technical stuff. One question I kind of have, and something the sentiment I see around monorepos on like X and other platforms, a lot of times people will say something like, "I hate monorepos, but the other way is just 10 times worse." And I see that sometimes. I see like sure, like there's some friction points with any build tools in my opinion, but I'm curious your take on like what the biggest friction points for monorepos are right now.
Sure, sure. Yeah, super good question because it's something that has been quickly evolving, I feel like. And I feel like some of the like past trauma of trying to use a monorepo still exists for some folks. And so certainly as you're mentioning, there are trade-offs today. What I usually say is that the monorepo tooling still isn't there yet, to be honest. Like it isn't the amazing experience that I have in my head personally. We're doing the work. We're getting there. We're paving the road, but it still is a quickly developing space. And so I do think today, if I were starting a new repository, if I were starting a new project, if I were starting at some company and it was like, hey, Anthony, we need you to architect, our CI/CD systems, I would still be defaulting to a monorepo. So I think it's the right choice today. I also think we're just going to make it better. One of the trade-offs, I just alluded to it. One of the trade-off, when I think of the trade-offs, I think of dependency management across the repository. If you're using perhaps npm, it still struggles. npm, the package manager, sorry. If you're using npm, the package manager, it still sometimes does actually struggle with resolving modules and like resolving the right things at the right times. I always recommend pnpm if you're using a JavaScript monorepo. So if you're learning to enjoy monorepos, please learn to use pnpm as well. Another thing that I think of that comes to mind immediately is a lot of the source control, GitHub namely, a lot of the source control services that you use weren't really designed with the monorepo use case in mind. Kind of the chief thing that I think of is actually the .github/workflows folder. It really is kind of its own monolithic folder while you're working in a monorepo. And in a monorepo, you're thinking in packages, you're thinking in applications. And so you're kind of taking this one repository and slicing it up into its component parts, if you will. But .github/workflows, it's just up there at the top and it's going to do whatever it's going to do. It doesn't really have knowledge of that package graph that exists in the monorepo. This is something that when you bring Turborepo to a GitHub workflow, like you start to be able to enjoy that package graph that you've been building that works great for your build and deploy experience. This is how we operate on Vercel, actually. We take the knowledge of Turborepo and we use it to understand your package graph, and we look at what has been affected by your source code changes, and we're only going to redeploy the applications that you either wrote new code in that application or in one of the packages that leads up to that application. So we're not going to redeploy your entire world every time you do git push. Instead, we'll look at, okay, here's the set of changes that you have, okay, and that only maps to, this one application. So we'll only redeploy that one. And that's just something that as the ecosystem around monorepos has continued to evolve, there's more and more of that. There didn't used to be any of it, which is kind of that existing trauma that I was mentioning, but that's kind of something that has been quickly evolving, that these CI/CD systems now are starting to be able to way better understand kind of what's going on in that repository, in that monorepo, instead of just, having all of these distributed repositories.
That's a really good point, actually. And I think because we're using Turbo, we haven't run into it as much. So that's why it hasn't been a huge pain point for us. But I can see without that aspect, having to control what gets deployed every single time based on like maybe manually setting chain, that could be a disaster, or it could lead to some production issues even. Good point. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. And the trauma definitely was warranted to some degree. Like when I used monorepos, I think 8 years ago for the first time, it was a little bit trauma inducing. It was a really old monorepo setup. I can't even remember what the tech was, but everything about it was a pain point. That
Yeah,
trauma was there.
that actually is also my story. I just when I was pretty junior at the time, and we had all these repositories spread out everywhere, and I was like, hey, why can't we put this all together into one thing? Like spiritually, that just makes sense, right? Like we're all here together working on the same stuff, and we just like have everything everywhere. And I gotta like rewrite the same ESLint configuration all over the place, or I have to go make another repository, publish that, and then make sure it gets spread out to everywhere. And so yeah, like I was like, yeah, like spiritually, shouldn't we all put it in the same box? And yeah, I kind of went for the same exploration of like, and again, this was many years ago of like, oh, the tooling is just not here for this. And thankfully now it is, or we're getting there, I should say.
You essentially had to have a developer that's just in charge of writing monorepo tooling at that time. I
Exactly. Yeah.
remember there was one person that was just like all of his dev time was just supporting the monorepo, which is crazy. Not anymore,
Right.
which is great.
Right.
Um, all right, so one kind of side advantage that I see with monorepos, especially with stuff like AI tools coming out, right? Cursor, Windsurf, everything else that's out there, is having all your code in one place for the LLMs to be able to consume, put into context, and give really, really good like suggestions based on, the package over here, the package over there, without you having to manually put it in. Have you seen any of that happening? Like, was this planned? Is this a side, like something that just happened all of a sudden? Or is it not an advantage because of maybe too big of context or something? I don't know.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, no, great question. This is something that I was actually kind of worried about when, on the first editions of Cursor or whatever LLM tooling that I was using to try to code with, particularly in my editor. I remember having a moment being like, oh gosh, like this thing can't tell where that other package is. It's just too much information. There's too much code. It has to try to figure out where everything is. I actually yesterday for Turborepo in our monorepo, I wrote a new feature. I just literally prompted like, "Hey, can you write a dependency syncing checker?" Enter, and it pretty much got it. And I was really surprised. And like, yeah, I personally, I'm willing to say like I have been kind of an AI antagonist. I haven't been like the person that's going out and trying every new model and every new product and stuff like that. I've been a little bit bearish on it. And recently my tide has been turning. I had the experience, like I just mentioned, that cursor experience, but also I go into our closed source repos and I have been periodically testing, like, hey, how much context can this handle? Can I tell it to go, like, if I prompt for something that is going to be cross package and I know it, is it going to figure it out? And as I've continued testing it, it's continued to get better and better. I'm not really I use Cursor every now and then. I actually when I'm actually writing code, I use NeoVim, but if I want to prompt for some AI thing, I just open Cursor really quick. So yeah, I have been noticing the slow progression of just monorepos getting handled better. I believe it was a couple days ago, somebody released a model that has like a zillion tokens. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it could handle like anything that isn't Google's code base effectively. And so it can hold a lot of context. There is definitely a difference between holding enough context in the window and being able to interpret it and understand it. So at least at the time of our recording this. Remains to be seen how well that goes. But in my experiments, I've been seeing a ton of progression in a really small amount of time. I think another thing that might be worth mentioning is I have over on a branch right now an MCP server for Turborepo. Hopefully, maybe by the time this makes it to air, we'll have released that. But and so yeah, I'm hoping that it'll be able to actually just go grab the right context for you in a tool call, and you won't have to do as much manual work as far as like asking for this part of the repository or that part of the repository. So I don't know how well it'll work. Again, this is all very scientific still. Like this stuff is super effective, but lots of explorations to do still, of course.
Yeah, and that's been sort of my experience too. I've been a little bit more bullish on it, but like I've been hesitantly bullish because like obviously the implications of it are
Right,
fairly,
right.
yeah, could
Yeah.
be negative, could be positive anyway. But I just like had this kind of click that went off in my head when using the monorepo that as these tools become more and like better and better, the monorepo itself will be more valuable
Hmm.
to those tools because it's just way easier to pull the context. And like you said, it's starting to really understand monorepos themselves better. Like not
Yeah.
even like know your code, but like how to write in a monorepo. I've
Right.
noticed that's been
Right.
a big progression where like I can just like tell like it just knows that we're in a turbo repo or a monorepo in general and is able to create a package that other packages will see. It's an interesting kind of pattern that I've noticed. Like some things are going to be disadvantaged, not intentionally, but just because it's just, no one thought LLMs were going to exist. And some things are going to have advantages because they came to be. And that's going to change the landscape of development or really anything
Yeah.
else, which is, yeah, cool to think
Yeah.
about, but who
I
knows
think
what's actually going to happen.
one other piece of the puzzle that I've actually should clarify. I When I said I was kind of bearish on AI, I meant like the today state of it.
Mhm.
Like I was just like not getting that much value out of it, like just for my daily driving. And I've slowly noticed myself opening Cursor and Cursor more. So yeah, that clarification. But the other thing I was going to mention was it's also been interesting to watch. We've had a couple teams just pay off their technical debt, and
Yeah.
the effectiveness of like the coupling of the monorepo, but also they just pay their debt. Like that debt, when they're trying to use an LLM, just got infinitely more expensive. And so it kind of all these things start to stack on top of each other. And it's really interesting to watch all these dynamics play into each other.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, yeah, it's cool to, as like a tech nerd to keep an eye on as well, which is awesome.
Of course, yeah.
To finish off here, I kind of want to throw it to you. What's next for Turborepo? Like you mentioned that you're working, I mean, the MCP server sounds like it's imminent, but is there anything else that you can share? I know some stuff's probably a little bit further out, but
Sure, yeah. I think as well, as I mentioned, that MCP server definitely gonna at least get that to an experimental release. Who knows, in a month, some model might just completely make it irrelevant. So who knows? I think we'll probably just leave it as something experimental that's there for you to use, and who knows what's gonna happen in 3 months? You might not even need it. So yeah, there's that. I think a lot of the thing that we're thinking about right now is kind of a more holistic experience with Turborepo. We know that we have a good build experience with Turborepo, but we want to try to build a deeper integration. That might mean, just running non-CI build, or sorry, excuse me, non-build CI tasks. We have a lot of that knowledge just baked into Turborepo about what you need to do when, and it's just a matter of getting it ran. So that's something that we've been exploring and thinking about is like how much how much juice is there to squeeze out of a GitHub action that we can do ourselves? Like we really do want to make that experience as good as we can, but there are just things that are out of our hands. And, how much do we want to take control of kind of the end-to-end experience, honestly? So that's kind of one thing we've been thinking about. Another thing that we've been thinking about has been kind of closer to your source code. We've been thinking about can we do a better job of handling the tools that you're already using? Do folks want to see us, integrate linters really deeply and abstract them away? Nobody loves playing with ESLint
yes,
configurations.
please.
Nobody loves playing with ESLint configurations. Will that come in the form of, some inbuilt, like, hey, we already handled the configuration for you, just run whatever linter command you have? We've been thinking about we've been calling it Turborepo boundaries. One of the things that we see folks do a lot is we've kind of alluded to it several times while we've been talking, but you kind of are meant to think of your monorepo not as one giant box, but a box with spaces in it, like these little slices, these little containers, those are your packages. But sometimes folks kind of break the boundaries of those packages. They'll write paths that are like dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash packages slash UI to try to get to a component. But you're meant to use your package manager to get to that component, right? And so we've been thinking about, okay, here's a default rule set that we know keeps you safe. Because when you do that, you actually do jump out of the boundaries of what we know about the package manager. And so when you do that, you can break caching, for instance, you can break your builds. And so in the effort of trying to make the monorepo just by default feel correct, we have it in experimental right now. Turbo boundaries is a command that you can use. So we're working to get that stabilized. We've been dogfooding that on our repositories to try to find out, what's the best experience that we can create. And so really excited for that one specifically, actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I believe we run into that, especially early on when we were first making the monorepo. For the most part, the build failing is the thing that kind of indicates when that doesn't work. But yeah, for sure, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I especially liked the ESLint integration. Please do that, or NPrettier, or whatever other tool that we can think of that we don't have to manually set up, because that's been a big pain point, honestly. Setting up ESLint.
It's funny, every time we talk about ESLint with somebody, we get hesitant to go build something because we started using Biome internally at Vercel, and we're like, oh, this is just so good. And so we don't feel like we have to go build something separately. Let's just, use the ecosystem. Maybe we can recommend it to folks or something like that. I don't know. We haven't fully thought it through yet. Things change so fast.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe give options configure either or something like that. Yeah, no.
Right.
I 100% get you. I haven't tried Biome yet. That's a good point for me to actually try screw around with. I've heard it's really good. Yeah, I think that's it though. So thank you so much, Anthony, for coming on. I kind of want to give you some time to share any socials that you have, any links you want to share, any blog posts, any websites, and we'll have links to anything that you share in our show notes.
Sure. If you're looking for me, you can probably go to shew.dev, SHEW.dev. You'll find stuff about me. All my links are there to whatever social properties I pay attention to the most. What else have I been doing? I've been making a lot of YouTube videos lately. I've put together at least the start of hopefully what is like a Monorepo 101 course. So if you're, trying to get into monorepos, you want to learn some concepts, stuff like that. A ton of that is in the Turborepo documentation. But if you enjoy video better, you have having somebody explain it directly to you. I have a YouTube video course up there. Like I said, you can go to my personal website and you'll find the link. But yeah, and then if you're looking for Turborepo, go ahead and visit turborepo.com. You will find some all things Turborepo there. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to check out that course, actually. I didn't know that existed. So have a link to shew.dev, that course, and turborepo.com in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, Anthony. It was really a pleasure, and appreciate you sharing some knowledge on this stuff, especially to me, because again, this was a Mike selfish episode. So thank you.
Sounds good. No, yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Really hope you enjoyed that interview episode, and make sure to subscribe, leave a review on your podcast app, share this episode with your friends. Want to give you guys a reminder that we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/htmallthethings. You can check out our $3 tier and be part of the episode. And we want to give a huge shout out to our $3 tier patrons: Tim from thewebhacker.com, Jason from geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All Things Discord, and Stacy Motzler, and her website is swoonworthydesigns.com. And feel free to leave a review and rating in your podcast app. Thank you very much. We're signing off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show, and we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings, and we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things, and on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.